Does a piece of Nathaniel Essex's past hold the secret to Krakoa's future? Well, let's hop into the pages of Immortal X-Men issue number 8 and find out together, shall we? So then, in keeping with the gimmick of this series, every member of the Quiet Council gets their own little focus issue, and this time around we get to focus on Mystique. We see a younger Raven use her shape-shifting abilities to break into a military installation in the New Mexico desert. All the while, her internal monologue once again returns to a subject that has been all over this Immortal X-Men series, and that is, of course, the hundreds of years long courtship between Irene Adler Destiny and Raven Darkholme Mystique. Oh, sure, they're all lovey-dovey and happy now, but apparently that wasn't always the case. In fact, as we discover, this military installation is actually being run in part by Irene Adler. It seems this whole place was running deadly experiments on mutants, all for the sake of someone named Dr. Milbury, who Mystique already knows is a very thinly veiled pseudonym for Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister. Apparently this was one of Mr. Sinister's earliest attempts to try and attain immortality for himself. By manipulating mutant genes, Essex hoped to put a little bit of his own being inside the DNA of some of what will become the most prominent families in mutantdom, the Xaviers, the Shaws, the Summers, etc., etc., so that one day he would be able to activate these latent genes and, well, I guess cheat death once again for another couple hundred years. It's also actually left a little open-ended to whether or not Sinister was able to pull off that plan or not, because we actually jump back in time once again to Victorian England. Now, judging by my comments section on some older videos, I got the feeling that a lot of you only just now realized that Destiny's real name is Irene Adler, as in the one from the old Sherlock Holmes stories. Well, yes, that's exactly who Destiny is supposed to be, and why, yes, if she's Irene Adler, then that definitely means that Mystique Raven Darkholme was also Sherlock Holmes. And as we join the two in the past, it seems that Scotland Yard has passed along another one of its very strange, unsolvable mysteries to the greatest detective of Baker Street. This would end up being no normal investigation, though, because this would just so happen to be the day that Mystique and Destiny met Nathaniel Essex for the very first time. As we hear tell, he was attacked by some sort of strange creature, and when Sherlock, Mystique, and her Watson go to his house to ask for information, he seems sullen and gaunt, like he's about to die at any moment. They learn that Essex was married once, but now that his wife is dead, he has fully thrown himself into his work, figuring out something he calls the Essex Factors, which he believes will be the building blocks to eternal life and great power. Basically, he's working on proto-mutant research. At first, Mystique actually believes that Nathaniel Essex may very well have been the victim of Jack the Ripper, and as such, she decides to take a very innocent, very murderable form and walk the dark streets of London at night to try and arouse the attention of the same killer. This issue, if you couldn't tell, is actually wonderfully darkly humorous too. Mystique and Destiny argue like an old married couple even when they're young, and Mystique even cracks a joke that had me rolling on the floor, saying the hardest thing about pretending to shapeshift into a fancy high society lady at night in London is the fact that she's basically walking around naked, and all those extra folds and bustles just never felt right. Eventually, Mystique does end up finding the creature that attacked Nathaniel the night before, and wouldn't you just know it, it turns out to be Mr. Sinister. But wait, how is that possible, you might be asking? Well, it seems that Mr. Sinister and Nathaniel Essex have developed some sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde relationship ever since Essex lost contact with the Egyptian, finger quotes, which is obviously a reference to Apocalypse. It's also here too, everyone's secrets are basically out in the open. Mystique and Destiny know what Essex is, and as such, they're not afraid revealing themselves to be mutants to him. Of course, even when he's not in Mr. Sinister form, Essex still is the biggest, most cornball, lovable, detestable fop of all time. He doesn't call them mutants at all. In fact, he calls them his Essex-Men, ha ha ha. Essex rambles for a bit about how he desperately wants to live to see the next century and what the future might hold for their kind. He also says that all of his research is, for one reason or another, being held back and shat upon by those dastardly Charleses. No, not Charles Xavier, that'll come later. He's talking about Charles Darwin, who thinks he's a crackpot. But also Charles Babbage, who, if you know your Victorian-era scientists, is basically the father of the computer brain, which will eventually one day become the same AI and robots that hunt the mutants so mercilessly. It also just so happened to be this day, too, that Essex opted to take the diamond as his symbol for Mr. Sinister. Mystique thinks it's probably best to lock this guy up in an asylum where he can't hurt himself or others. And after he mysteriously dies in custody, Mystique basically vowed to not think about Essex anymore, which makes the flashback from the first issue of Immortal X-Men make a lot more sense. Destiny had lied to Mystique then about running into Nathaniel Essex as Mr. Sinister once again. Why would she do that? Well, as the comic comes to an end, it's implied that Destiny knew way more about what Sinister was up to, including a special secret hidden cloning chamber complete with a series of pods that have different logos on them. There's the diamond, but also the club in spade, implying that Orchus's own Dr. Stasis might not be the only rogue Mr. Sinister clone the mutants are going to have to contend with as the comic comes to a close. And so that was Immortal X-Men issue number 8, everybody, and overall I thought it was a fun time-traveling little romp that ended up ultimately being more about Destiny and Mr. Sinister than a focus piece for Mystique. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think you're going to have a hard time topping Mystique's stories after Hickman made her such a strong centerpiece to his Krakoa arc. And between this and Judgment Day and the upcoming Sins of Sinister crossover event for all the X-Men books, it looks like Kieran Gillen and the rest of the X-Men office have basically put their foot down and said, you know what, Mr. Sinister is going to be the next big thing in X-Men. And if he keeps being this incredibly fun and funny and deliciously evil and campy, well, I think we're all going to have a pretty good time. Overall, I'd feel comfortable giving this one a 7.5 out of 10.
Hey there everyone, it's your old pal Cape Joel again, thanking you so much for watching to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, why not check out my Amazon link down in the description. Yes, that's right, the Cape Joel channel officially has its own Amazon storefront now. You can pick up a comic or anything else for that matter, and if you did, you'd really be helping me in the channel. So with that out of the way everyone, I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.